Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome everybody to Ask an Advocate with the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. My name is Lauren Duff. I'm the communications manager, and I have joining me today as a co-host, Nick Silveri-Hiller. And we have Nicole Powell and Jill Henson joining us as our guests today to talk about how to engage men in healthy relationships and engage them in the movement to end domestic violence. So I'd like to start off today by having our guests each introduce yourself, please, and just tell us a little bit about the work that you do. We'll start with you, Nicole.
Man, I've been waiting for you to say Joe. That's okay. Hi, my name is Nicole Powell. I serve as the Community Education Manager for the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County, located in Media, Pennsylvania. The work our team does focuses on prevention education within the community, especially within schools. So that's ranging from middle schools, high schools, and on college campuses, through various programming tailored to discussing healthy and unhealthy relationships. And of course, since the start of the pandemic, all of our work has transitioned to virtual platforms, specifically social media, of course, and our newly launched podcast. So check that out too. And so we are very intentional to engage with members from the community from all walks of life to highlight the intersectionality of domestic violence and various demographics. And so last year during this time, we were at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. So we not only wanted to engage male identifying advocates, but specifically those of color, in addition to our LGBT trans queer friends who we were celebrating Pride throughout the month too. So we even had Joe on there. He did a phenomenal job, and we continue to work with Joe. And so we just literally have a voice. Where we're able to have a voice, we're willing to speak and have a presence to speak about domestic violence and how to build healthy relationships moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. And Joe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, I'm Joe Henson. I'm the coordinator of Coaching Boys and the Men with the Domestic Violence Center, Chester County. We're located next county over from Nicole, down in Southeast Pennsylvania. My program itself, basically, the tenets are to teach respect, integrity, and nonviolence to young men in a sporting atmosphere. I work with the coaches. I train the coaches up on all the different topics that these young men in terms of dating relationships might encounter, and then the coaches deliver that material to the athletes, allowing them to make it their own because they already have that pre-existing connection and that leadership and mentorship role. But a bit about myself. Let's see, I spent, a lot of my life playing sports. I was a rugby player, ice hockey, a little bit of indoor soccer, some baseball. I spent 11 years in the military, and I majored in international relations. So I got a bit of background myself in mentoring young men, working in sports and things like that. So yeah, that's a bit about me, my program, and what we do.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. And so I kind of wanted to just jump in right away and ask, in your work, what is your definition of healthy masculinity? Like, what are you working towards? And I guess we can start with Joe and then go over to Nicole.
Well, we're definitely working towards eschewing a lot of these toxic ideals around what it is to be a man or a young boy. Ideas around sex and relationships, bragging about your sexual prowess, talking, what people always say, oh, it's just locker room talk. It's like, no, that's straight, just disrespect and things like that. So we're trying to get rid of that. We're trying to teach these young men the difference between aggression within athletics. Like, okay, get out there, win the game, get the goal, do what you got to do. But where's that, cross the line, and sort of clearly illustrating where that line is. So that's sort of the goals surrounding masculinity that we're trying to outline for these young men, because most of them have no concept of this stuff aside from what they learn on TV, movies, video games, maybe friends, family, so on and so forth. But not everybody has a healthy role model, because not all masculinity is bad. I mean, within masculinity, we have stuff like courage and bravery, but people take that to the extreme and think courage and bravery means you can never be weak, you can never have emotions, you can never care about others. And it's like, no, you can do all that and still be a dude. So that's where we're trying to take it.
Same. So like Joe said, just trying to shift the narrative of what masculinity looks like, right? Because I think when you say masculinity, you automatically assume it's unhealthy. And so you have to add the preface of saying, okay, what does healthy masculinity look like? Because I mean, in general, you just want people to be genuinely good individuals and humans, right? Regardless of how they identify with gender or sexuality. And so we're trying to shift the narrative, like Joe said, in terms of what that looks like, what that feels like, what that sounds like, and how we support individuals in that walk of life, because socially there's a standard or an image rather of what that would all entail, but we're trying to encourage individuals to just have healthy relationships, not just with partners, but like with family members, with friends, especially like with siblings, things like that, and how to effectively communicate so that you feel heard, because I think a lot of people don't feel heard, especially when it comes to, again, that healthy masculinity and what that looks like and how to get your message across. And so it's a matter of, again, encouraging that voice and that presence in a manner that is effective and heard and accepted and respected ultimately.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you both for that. And, along those lines, the harmful gender norms that go along with those traditional versions of masculinity, those can be harmful to men or folks that identify as men, as well as to relationships and the folks that they interact with. So can you talk a little bit about how those harmful gender norms affect men's mental health, and maybe also a little bit about how harmful gender norms can also impact survivors who identify as men, or just even don't identify along that binary or within the binary either.
Okay. You want to start, Joe?
I was just going to ask real quick if you could repeat the first half of that.
Yeah, so the first half is, how do harmful gender norms affect men and their mental health? How can the harmful gender norms be harmful to men themselves?
Well, right off the bat, when we're talking mental health, I mean, I can't tell how many times recently on Facebook, especially during the pandemic or other forms of social media, whatever, I've seen dudes posting about men's mental health. And it's kind of funny because they're getting close to the point, but they're not quite there. They're complaining about stuff that it's like, you're victimizing yourself because you're holding on to these patriarchal norms of, one example was like, oh, I can't, voice my opinion or voice my mental health because everyone will make fun of me. And then 2 seconds later, same dude's making fun of somebody for their mental health. I remember like when Will Smith was crying during the whole discussion about Jada having an entanglement, and people were making fun of the man. They were making fun of him for having emotions. And but at this, so you have these moments where a man like that does show his feelings, does show his emotion, and then gets dragged by the entire internet for it, gets memed out of control. And so men really need to stop, male-identified individuals need to stop and realize that, you are feeding into this. Like, if you want to address mental health, you need to take the time to understand that we need to be open and honest and have these discussions. And you can't just meme somebody for having emotions. But we hold on to these ideas that to have these emotions, to speak who you are, either makes you weak, makes you woman-like, or the idea that if you speak to your partner on your emotions, they're going to view you as less of a man. So this stuff gets bottled up, swallowed, held inside, and then suddenly suicide rates start skyrocketing. People are like, oh, why do men commit suicide at higher rates than women? And it's like, because we've been told our whole lives to swallow these emotions that we feel, that we have to be unfeeling cold robots. And that's just not the case. And so it does force men, male identified individuals into this box of appropriate behaviors, and having emotions and dealing with your mental health and going to therapy somehow viewed as weak or lesser, when in reality, it's the only way you're going to survive, especially after a year of a pandemic and not having the support systems that we were so used to having around us. That definitely needs to, needs to change, needs to be addressed.
Please go ahead, Laura.
I'm just gonna, add to that. You mentioned like even just communicating with your partner could be seen as being weak, or that vulnerability is seen as a weakness instead of a strength. And I think that just goes back to what Nicole said about communication being so important for healthy relationships. And how can we expect folks to have healthy relationships if they're being given the message that communication is bad, when really like that communication is so key to having those healthy relationships.
It's beyond bizarre because we view emotional intelligence as a woman's trait, as a feminine trait. And so to have emotional intelligence as a man and communicate to a woman, some of these men then view themselves de facto as the woman in the relationship. And it's like, that's absurd. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And the fact that it has to be, oh, sorry, Nicole, I was just saying the fact that it has to be either or, seen as like being the woman, quote unquote, in the relationship, or being the man, quote unquote, in the relationship. I mean, that in itself is a problem, like the fact that we are thinking about it in that dichotomy itself is part of the issue.
I'm a firm believer that just about everything is on a spectrum. And this idea of a duality of a polar opposites, and the only way it can be, ridiculous.
Remind me of the second part of the question. I got the mental health piece.
Yeah, so the second part of the question was, how do those harmful gender norms also affect men who are victims or survivors of domestic violence?
Oh, yeah. All right. So perfect. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I strive to be a mental health advocate, especially as someone who is like a member of like a faith community, because it's very looked down upon, especially in the Black community, right? And so Black mental health matters, yes. And although I am a fan of Toni Braxton, her song entitled "Just Be a Man About It" is not just a song title. It's something that people genuinely adhere to and repeat and expect males who identify as such to behave as whatever a man should behave like, right? Especially in relationships. And so it's a song about relationships, and it's about how to behave in relationships. But even as a system and advocates about domestic violence, we have the image of a man specifically being the perpetrator in unhealthy relationships, and that's not always the case. And so as we embark upon the Engaging Men campaign, and I know we try to strive for male advocates to speak up, but I know we also try to take the initiative to also encourage male victims and survivors to speak up too, because even if you're in a same-sex relationship or a heterosexual relationship, partners can be aggressive. Even as an African-American woman, I know my mouth can be a little aggressive sometimes, and something as like saying things are demasculating can be harmful from not just a partner's perspective, but again, we have to, like as parents, we have to watch how we speak to our children, our young boys, how they are nurtured and brought up, and how we encourage them to express their emotions, whether it be sadness or anger, right? Hug your child, show them that affection is not a bad thing. Don't run away from it. Tell me how you feel. If you feel sad, why do you feel sad? How can I support you in this experience? Are you angry? You can be angry. How are we going to express this anger, right? Going to the gym is great. How else do you want to express your anger today? Do we need to go outside and scream for 5 minutes? Let's go outside and scream for 5 minutes. So it's not a matter of, oh, this is bad, you can't do this. It's how you do it that makes all the change in terms of how to encourage people to share their experiences, especially with men and boys.
Yeah, Nicole, I absolutely love that. Like, all right, you're having a feeling, and that's okay. Now, how do we express that feeling in a way that is constructive for you and is healthy for everybody else around you? Like, that's so important. And to teach kids those emotional coping skills at an early age would be huge. I mean, if we could just get everybody doing that, we'd be taking leaps and bounds forward. So I love that message, to work with kids from an early age to like feel those emotions and learn how to express them in a constructive way. That's awesome. I love that message.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me of Bell Hooks' quote, and I may be getting it slightly wrong, but it's something to the effect of like the first ask that patriarchy makes of young men is not to do violence against women, but to do violence against themselves and cutting off that piece of them. And so I just think that's when I saw that, I was like, I'm just going to say that, whatever, because I think it's just like a perfect encapsulation of that, like, in order to allow violence to happen to others around you, you have to first cut yourself off from that piece of you that's like that just a piece of you and your emotions and everything. So I wanted to also really look at, Nicole, you brought up like how you've approached this subject intersectionally, and specifically on your Facebook Lives and your podcasts, you've specifically looked at how masculinity is experienced by Black men and men of color in general. But I know specifically over the summer, last summer, you looked at that. So can you talk about, what, how you've kind of winded that into your work and kind of lessons learned, or how can we, I guess, kind of bring up that conversation more? I kind of threw a lot of questions out there. But I hope you can.
And I plan to answer all of them.
Okay,
and
perfect.
So first, as you all know, and I appreciate the opportunity beforehand too around having the conversation of how Black Americans experience domestic violence through systemic racism and oppression. And there's a lot of overlap, right? And so we kind of broke down the power and control in terms of what that looks like. And it's aggressive, but helpful. And again, especially last summer, literally around this time, where we were at a climax within the Black Lives Matter movement and continue to be in the height of that. And so we have really been intentional on engaging the experience of the Black man and just men of color in general, especially LGBT trans queer males as well, because that's a whole nother experience that does not get tapped into and tends to be overlooked even within the Black community. And so what we have been doing is kind of allowing people to have their experiences shared and asking the questions about healthy masculinity and what does that look like for you, even as someone who is Latino or African American, and also someone who might be a strong believer in terms of religion, and also in terms of, again, how you identify sexually. And so we spoke with a lot of people, again, including Joe. And we had to bring that into the mix because even as an African American community, we feel like we have to protect our Black men. So we're not going to report them if they hurt us, because there is that tension with law enforcement, even though as domestic violence advocates, we see law enforcement officers as our allies, and they are, and we work so closely with them. It's a different experience when we're trying to support victims and survivors with their experience with domestic violence. And so we have to bridge that gap to ensure that people can come to us. Even as African Americans, I did some research as a student. Black people don't reach out for services. Why? Because we're not often deemed as a priority. That's where the whole initiative and movement around Black maternal health comes into play, right? And so it's just a matter of ensuring that people feel safe. That is our role as advocates. And so we have to ensure that all people feel safe, however they identify, whether it be race, gender, and sex. And so that's what we strive to do. That's what our team is striving to do, and continue to have those conversations and invite people from all of those walks of lives to have conversations with us and tell us what we have to do better, because we're not perfect. We're good. I'm one person, but I can't change everybody. Okay. So we're working on that.
No, I think it's such an important conversation, particularly because I know when I began the work of engaging men, I came from like a university position, which was a mostly white group. And then when I got into kind of working at a local program, I was working with the general community. And so I kind of realized that the way that I was talking about masculinity or healthy masculinity was actually a very like narrow kind of almost white idea of what masculinity was, and not taking into account the experiences of just men in color and how, that not only are they experiencing their experiences with masculinity is, influenced by their experiences with racism, their experiences with all other forms of oppression. And so I just wanted to really bring that up and highlight that, because I think it's a really important conversation to be having as we talk about how to engage men. So thanks for, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I appreciate you for saying that and acknowledging that, because I mean, to be honest, like African Americans, we've been groomed to be defensive since 1619 when we came in this country, okay? And it's like we don't have a choice. Like, the whole idea of a strong Black woman, we tired of being strong, like we strong, but to what extent, right? Can we be vulnerable? Even for men, like they have to protect us, they have to protect themselves and their bodies and their mental stability, right? And we're trying to protect them too. And we're all, I mean, it's a struggle, again, we're not going to report our Black men because we don't want the police to come and then some hurt, and then they become violent towards them. Like, and we're not helping anybody now. Now all of us are at harm, and we all feel unsafe. And so it's a different vantage point for sure.
And Joe, I know you've also adapted your work with Coaching Boys into Men to be more inclusive. Can you talk about like how you've adapted that?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the big focal points for us was gender inclusive language, right? Because we don't want to assume that everybody is straight or cisgendered. We also don't want to assume that everything is an emotional or like a dating type relationship. You have friends, that's a form of relations. You have family, that's a form of relations. So one of the big changes right off the bat was just to make the language gender neutral. Use partner, use friend, use they, them, things like that. And it actually, might be anecdotal, but we've had a few instances with trans athletes and LGBTQ athletes feeling more comfortable with the language and actually encouraging open dialogue within their team. So that's pretty helpful. But another thing that we have been working on and looking at is, so Chester County is kind of interesting in that our demographics somewhat match the rest of the United States in terms of percentages, but these populations are localized. So Southern Chester County is like almost entirely Latinx, or maybe not almost entirely, but like 60-some% Latinx, right? Western Chester County out near Coatesville is like 60% Black. So you have these very distinct populations sort of centered in different areas. And of course, between Chester County and Delco, we have Lincoln and Cheney, who love to fight over the oldest HBCU. My father, a Cheney grad, I got to give it to Cheney. But we have very distinct populations centered in different areas. And one thing that I've been looking at lately is getting into Southern Chester County, which has the high Latinx population. Because so for those who aren't familiar with the Latinx experience and machismo culture, there is a value placed on masculinity. And although not all of it's negative, because some of it is, like I said in an earlier question, things like leadership and strength and intelligence. And those are good values for anybody, but there's also the idea of like looking down on those who aren't as machismo as you and things like that. Now, that's not the be all end all for all Latinx individuals, but it is a thing within the culture that we would like to work on and work with. But then we also have to navigate the issues of ICE and migrant detentions. And I know that things are slowly shifting with the new administration, but it's still not fixed. It's still not better. And so there's a lot of people who don't want to, as Nicole's mentioned with the Black community, people unwilling to turn in abusers because they're worried about the police response. They're worried about, the criminal justice system and its poor, well-documented treatment of minorities. So you have the same fears in the Latinx community where they're worried that, ICE might get called, someone might get deported. We have people who are US citizens that are worried that they might get sent back anyways just because. So, within my program, we are trying to navigate a lot of complex topics like these because, it's a crazy world, and at face value, it seems so easy. Call the police and go get help, but unfortunately for the non-dominant groups, be it race or gender or orientation, they don't have the same access to resources, and I don't know if access is the word. It might be just that they're entirely neglected. But those are the challenges within that realm that we are trying to overcome and implement changes for to grow the Coaching Boys and Men program and reach more diverse communities.
We're getting some questions in from our participants on Facebook, and a lot of them seem to be curious about, as a parent, how do you talk to young folks about these harmful gender norms? What does healthy masculinity and healthy relationships mean? And how do you do that in a way that helps change that view without saying that how do we help change that philosophy without diminishing the idea of manhood, or how do you teach them what healthy masculinity looks like, as well as what powerful means in a healthy relationship versus in an aggressive way? So I think the overall gist is, how can we teach younger boys and young men that it's okay to be masculine, and masculine doesn't have to be you can be masculine without having the negative and the harmful parts in there.
Well, one of the easiest tools to use is examples, and one of my favorite examples is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He is a big man. He is a former college athlete. He is a former pro wrestler. He is power. But he is kindness. If you follow him on Instagram, him taking care of his daughters, him preaching messages of respect and integrity. Yeah, okay, maybe the worst thing he does is make fun of his friend Kevin Hart and call him short. But in the grander scheme of things, I believe that he exhibits a great example of what healthy masculinity is, because he's all about uplifting and empowering other people. But you rarely, if ever, outside of him doing his bits as a wrestler, I've never heard him say or do anything that would raise a red flag. So right off the bat, examples are one of the best ways you can do it, because it also keeps it within the realm of reality. Because instead of giving a hypothetical and saying, hey, you can handle it this way, you can point to someone and go, this guy is that. This is what we want. There's nothing wrong with being big, with being strong, with lifting weights, with working out, all that sort. There is nothing wrong with being a dude. But do it with kindness, do it with intent, do it with purpose, do it with integrity.
My turn.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with Joe. My statement was really going to be the best way to teach is to represent that. So we learn it in the home first. Home is your first school, your first teacher. You learn everything from home. From home, from seeing healthy masculinity. My brother, he was a part of Boy Scouts, and to this day, they're all we're all still close, even though we were in Scouts years ago. But you have to see it represented. So connecting your children with great models, role models seem to be cliche, but it's not cliche in this experience, because if they see it, they'll learn that it is accepted, and you have to also accept it as a parent, right? So you also have to invite them to say, well, how did you see, I don't know, Uncle Jason do it, right? And how did that make you feel? And you can do the same thing if you felt like Uncle Jason was best received. You have to receive Uncle Jason the best way, right? And however Uncle Jason identifies, even treating your family members who might identify as LGBT trans queer with love and respect. That's how you teach your child to be a healthy male or female or individual in general. Do not talk down about it. Don't make jokes about it because it's not funny. I know of people who have had bad experiences with jokes received from family members for being about homosexuality, and it has deterred them from coming out to their family. So you have to first show it before you have other people like Joe and myself come into your school or your child's school and teach them. Second, encourage us to be in your child's school, right? We teach that, right? That's what Joe is for. That's what agencies like DAP are for. So we can come into the schools, have these conversations. We're not encouraging your kids to have sex, what you all think we're talking about, which we're not. We're teaching them how to talk about it before they even think about doing it, because they're thinking about it. It's just they don't know how to talk about it, right? And so we're teaching them those conversations, those boundaries, those red flags. If we're not in your child's health class and not coming to you saying, oh, this crazy lady came into my school and my classroom and talked to me about relationships and domestic violence, then you ain't doing your job. So that's what you have to do, right? And so that's what we're here for. We go into schools, we have these engaging conversations and programs where we do things where we have victims who identify as lesbian, gay, transgender, male and or female. And we have this activity called In Their Shoes, and they walk in these kids' shoes. And it talks about teen dating violence, but you don't have a lot of people, it's not like a whole bunch of physical violence. It's just the general spectrum, as Joe said, of what it all encompasses to be in a healthy relationship. How do you support not just yourselves, but your friends who are in these situations? Long answer to a short question.
No, Nicole, that's awesome. And so for folks who might be in different counties across the state, is that something that if parents want to see this in their school, can they reach out to their local, their principal and can try to get them connected with their local domestic violence program to get some of these trainings? Or how could they get this for kids in their community?
They better. No. No. So yes, we would love for, so there's a domestic violence agency in every county within the state of Pennsylvania, right? Perfect. Okay. Yes. And they all provide this conversation everywhere, right? Just allow them to have that presence, and they will come free of charge unless you want to, bless with financial donations to the agency. That will never be an unwanted need. And so, yes, please invite us. We continuously reach out to teachers, school superintendents, principals. We want to be in your schools. Our jobs are invaluable otherwise. And so we want to have these conversations. We have the time, we have the bandwidth, we have the energy, clearly. We want to do it. Let us do our job. Help us help you.
Awesome. And I will add to that, if you are not sure where to find your local domestic violence program, you can go to the PCADV website, and we'll drop the link into the chat there, but it's pcadv.org/find-help. And you can just type in your zip code and figure out which of our programs is the one closest to you. And you can reach out to them to see how to get started and maybe getting some of these programs involved in your kids' schools, your school district, your local community. Yeah, 'cause we want to get Nicole and Joe and all of their peers out there spreading this message to as many folks as possible. And along those lines, how else can we engage men in conversations and then also in actions that support building this knowledge and this conversation around having healthy relationships? And where can folks find resources about how to do this?
Well, a great starting place for resources is our social medias. For us, it's DVCCCPA on Instagram, Twitter, even TikTok, and then Nicole, y'all are what? DAP-DC? DAP-DC on all the same platforms.
DAP-Delco, sorry. Close, yes. DAP-Delco.
DAP-Delco.
Yeah.
DELCO. Because we're always putting up information across, be it directly about engaging men or the broader issue of intimate partner violence from, things like managing your money, legal service, all that. So right there's a great spot to start, is our websites, our social media, reaching out to us if if you need or want anything, because we are, both Nicole and myself, we are educators. This is what we do. And we can show you a wealth of other online resources that can help you out as well. What was the other part of the question? Because I was about to go off on a tangent, then I forgot.
It was about how do we engage men in these conversations and get them to take actions?
Well, let's start at least. I'll start with what I call the the jump off point, the starting point, and this is just erasing that idea that intimate partner violence is a women's issue because it's a gender issue, and we equate the idea of gender with women because it's often the dominant group that views themselves as the default. So when you hear gender, you think everybody but men. You think trans, non-binary, etc. When you hear race, you don't think white people. You think of Black, Latinx, Asian, things like that. Because within the dominant culture, that's the mindset, But if we can approach this and help men recognize that you have a gender. You just don't think about it on the daily because you're not forced to confront that because it's really not an issue for yourself because you are in a position of power. So it's never used against you. It's always in your advantage. So erasing the idea that gender issues are strictly women's issues is the first step. Because whether men play a role as a perpetrator, the victim, or a secondary, tertiary victim, maybe not the initial victim, but the son of, the brother of, the friend of, it still has an effect on you. So that, in my mind, is at least the first step in getting men involved. And what got me was the young woman I was dating handed me this book. It was called Half the Sky, written by Nicholas Kristof. And it's not that I didn't think that there weren't gender disparities and things like that, but I thought that like most of them were solved already because, being a millennial, like half the jobs I worked, I had women as bosses. So I'm like, everyone's equal because my boss is a woman. And then I start reading these books and I'm like, oh, damn, I got it wrong. I got it real wrong. And that was the first step of my progression, was rethinking how I viewed the world, because in my experience, everything was hunky-dory. When the reality was, no, the world's hurting. So reframing the way people think and reframing the conversation is that crucial first step.
I think that's such a good, point to like bring up like how you began this work, because I know for me, it was kind of a similar way of like, oh, I'm a feminist, like I'm all good. And then like all of like many of my women friends or like non-men friends were like, well, actually, we need to have some more conversations. And I was like, what? And then so like they pushed me to like really, unlearn and relearn and learn new things and in ways that I didn't expect. And so, one person in the chat brought up, what are some common pitfalls that men fall in that they can do better? And also with that, how can other men keep each other accountable? Because while I really love and appreciate all of my non-men friends who challenged me, like it shouldn't always be on them to be pointing out things that, we are also recognizing. So I wasn't sure if maybe Nicole, since you haven't started in a bit, it was throw it to you first, if you have thoughts about that. Or...
So how do we hold men accountable?
Yeah, how do we hold men accountable? And like, yeah, we can just, how do we hold men accountable? We can do that. Yeah.
Sure. So I'm not, like you said, as a woman, there's only so much accountability I can do for men. I feel like the male voice is so intricate in the community, in our world, and in society as a whole, that it's best heard from men, right? And so one of the things that we have been successful in doing, so I'm a member of a Black Greek letter organization. And so as a part of that, I also have a lot of ties to the fraternities who are Black-led organizations as well. And so they hold each other accountable. They are organizations built on brotherhood and service, and they are educating themselves. So they're inviting individuals like myself to come and educate themselves and the young people that they work with. So you have to educate yourself, engage them. Of course, that's another way of kind of engaging men, and extend the courtesy. So sharing, spreading the word, expanding the services, expanding understanding the conversation, understanding how, again, they too can identify as a victim in domestic violence. Is not, like Joe says, not just a women's issue, it's a societal issue. And so if you just reach out to those large groups and bodies and social organizations that are dedicated to literally engaging men and supporting them in their different experiences, that's a great first step.
So when it comes to holding men accountable, all right, oh God, I could take up the rest of the entire meeting on this, because this was something I had to do back when I was a sergeant in the Army, something that I still do to this day in different capacities. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. One of the best ways is to either start from positions of influence or attain positions of influence. I'm fortunate enough to work at a domestic violence center, but let's say I wasn't. Let's say I was working somewhere else and the office culture was toxic and horrible. Well, then I would need to attain a position of power to try and change things from the top down, because for whatever reason, people often, well, not for whatever reason, but people often take after leadership, and if leadership says, this is what we need to do, and this is why, and this is how, and this is the morally correct and right thing to do, people take notice and they want to follow the lead because you inspire them to do better, be better. So step one, or, one of the elements is attain these positions of influence and leadership so that we can affect from top down. Now, sometimes that takes a while. So you got to start at your own base level as well. For me, it's as simple as, talking to my friends. My one buddy, as absurd as this is going to sound, well, not the whole scenario, but what I did and the way anyways, let me get to it. This was a few years back, but someone from the Special Forces community came out as trans. This was an Army buddy of mine. And he was going on about how messed up it is and, just all the horrible things that we hear people say about trans individuals. And he and I sat there and talked for a while, and I just said, bro, people are people. Like, regardless of what you think, feel about, I'm like, you have your own wants, needs, desires. People are people. And I don't know if it was just in that moment something in his head clicked. I mean, we had been talking for probably 2 hours at that point. So it was a very deep conversation. So I can't just say, oh, I said people are people and it worked. No, but we had a long conversation. I sort of ended on the point that people are people and value them and treat them as such regardless of anything else. And he just had this moment of clarity after 2 hours of talking, was just like, oh, I get what you're saying. I'm not saying that I fixed him completely in that moment, but having these deep heart-to-hearts with your friends and trying to bring them on board, even if it's only tiny increments at a time, is a great way to help hold them accountable. Conversely, I know it's uncomfortable. I know people don't like to do it, and sometimes you got to, but just call out the bad behavior when you see it. My friend, we're back before quarantine hit, a bunch of us were all out at the bar. My friend said something to one of our women friends that was super inappropriate and gross, and he was like, oh, I'm just joking. And I called him out right there on the spot. Yeah, it was embarrassing for him, and it was awkward for me. I don't know how much of his mind I changed in that moment, but letting him know that behavior within our friend group is unacceptable is a step, because whether he comes along with the group and realizes it's right or gets quote unquote canceled, whatever that means, by the group because we don't want you around anymore, he was held accountable for his actions. He didn't want to change. So if he gets kicked from the friend group, he gets kicked from the friend group. That's accountability. And I know people are like, oh, that's cancel culture. No, it is being held responsible for your actions. It's responsibility for your actions. That's all it is. It's people telling you that you're inappropriate. Nobody wants that negativity. Nobody needs that in your life. There's the door. You can get with the program or you can leave. And so positions of leadership, heart-to-heart conversations, and call that out when you see it. Call it out. It's going to feel awkward. They might get embarrassed. You might get embarrassed. But eventually, they're either going to turn around and get with it, or they're going to go off do their own thing, and we don't need them anyways, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I could say after that. But thank you. And I just also want to say, like, I just want to acknowledge that I was like, we don't need, we shouldn't have women teach us things. And then I went right to Nicole. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I did that. And also use it as a learning example of, it's not a straight line, right? Like of learning, like, of unlearning these things and recognizing them. So I noticed it as soon as I was done asking you, and I just had to acknowledge it.
Well, yeah, and so Nick, one of the questions that we had gotten was concerning those, like, as we're trying to do better, like, what are the common pitfalls? And I think, like, whatever the pitfalls are, like, recognizing if you like have a misstep and like owning that and like is like the best thing you, and not that was that bad, that's something that I'm trying to do in my own journey with becoming a better ally to folks, is you've got to be willing to just admit when you do something wrong, because we're not all going to get it right the first time, but it is important that we're trying, and it's important that you recognize when you did get it wrong, if you did cause harm. So Joe, I appreciate that answer too, about like being willing to like take that uncomfortable position and among friends, like say something, because I know that can be difficult, and that takes a certain level of courage to do, especially if you're one of the first ones within your group who is recognizing these ways that we need to make changes, to be that first one to step in and say, yeah, everybody, that joke isn't funny. We shouldn't talk that way about things, whatever the situation happens to be. That can be tough, but it's so important, because I think folks tend to listen more to their peers. And so for like me as a white person to call out other white folks when they're doing racist things, saying racist things, perpetuating that system is important. And for men to call out other men when they're doing things that are harmful, is a really important aspect of this. With the peer thing, one of the other questions that we had was, parents can do a lot to try to influence the way that their kids think about gender norms and harmful gender norms and healthy relationships. But then they get in with a peer group, and if that peer group has a different opinion on it, they can have a really big impact on the way that their kid views things and sees things. So do any of you have advice for parents who maybe have been trying their best, but have now been faced with somebody in their kids' peer group kind of coming in and changing the way that they see relationships and gender norms and those things?
You won't go?
The pause was everything. Wait.
Sorry, putting everybody on the spot.
Okay, so I am a non-biological parent to an 8-year-old boy. He turns 8 today. Whew. And like our family, we strive to be the strongest voice in his ear. Peers have a lot of influence, but you have to ensure that you're that biggest influence over your child. And as someone who is like close to my parents, and I still consider them both to be my mentors, which is rare. But it's needed. Like it's hard. It's not easy. And so one thing that I remember my mom, who was intentional doing, was surrounding me with other individuals she entrusted to impart wisdom upon me. So she made sure that like people who shared her ideals and her core values as a parent, as a woman, as a Black woman specifically, she surrounded myself and my brother, my dad, the same thing too. Like they surrounded us with people who shared their values that would impart wisdom upon us. And that included their children. children. And so like we're all grown, married with kids now, and we're all still reminiscing on how our parents as a collective and as a village were intentional to connect and continue to keep us together because we all had the same values. We all went to the same church. We all had the same like hobbies. We all played the same sports. And so we all went to different schools, but we all remained connected. And so that's what I know that we have been intentional to do, like as a village and our culture, was to ensure that we surround our kids with people who share those values. That includes, so when they go to school and they hear somebody say something, well, that's not what my mama said, that's what I would say. And that's what like I hear kids say, like my best, like, that's not what my mama said. They said you ain't supposed to do that. And they didn't follow, and they're thinking, and they go back home, they take it back to their parents, and then they're, rethinking how things can be said or done, and that trend will continue. So just try to be the biggest, the loudest voice in your child's ear, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say. So I really don't have much to add other than you need to let them experience the world as close to on their own terms as possible to avoid, other resentments and issues. So you can't always say, hey, you can't have X, Y, and Z as a friend. But as Nicole said, the more you surround them with the type of people you want around them, the more positive voices they have, drowning out all the other malarkey.
I like the use of the word malarkey there, Joe. That's great. So I think we can end it out here on, what are some other ways that men can join the movement to end domestic violence? And I kind of specifically mean this in, I want to hear what you all have coming up, because I know, Nicole, you have a new podcast episode coming out, and Joe, I believe you have some events coming up in the future. So if you could both just kind of share what y'all have going on that folks can get involved with.
All right, I go first. All right, well, first of all, since I'm running Coaching Boys into Men, if you happen to have a child on a sports team, roughly, high school age, or you're a coach of a sports team, hey, reach out to me. Or if you're not in Chester County, if you're in Delco, reach out to Nicole. If you're in another county, reach out to your organization, see what they got going on. But if you're in Chester County, definitely get in my emails, phone, whatever. You can find my info on the website, the social media, all that sort of stuff, as I had mentioned before. So that's one. Two, we don't have all the details hammered out yet, but we will be doing a panel with several fathers for Father's Day, and we're going to discuss ways to engage your children, specifically male identified children, but all children, as a father when it comes to discussing gender norms, relationships, things like that, how to do it at the different ages, because you're not going to talk to a 5-year-old the same way you're talking to a high school senior who's got his first girlfriend. So we have that coming up. That'll be announced on our social media. Was it June 19th? We have a beer garden going down. With Locust Lane Brewery. All that info's up on our social media. That'd be a good chance to get out, see what's going on. Those are like the main things we got going right now. But like I said, check out our social media. We're always posting our new events. There's always opportunities to learn more, get involved, or just follow, and, increase our social media clout, help us expand our reach. You don't even have to spend money to do that. You just double tap or whatever.
Come on, saving money. So what Joe said, definitely follow us on all social media platforms. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. Yes, we are on TikTok. If you don't have one, don't get addicted. It's addicting. So be careful, just saying. And we also have a podcast called DAP Real Asian Chips. So REAL Asian Chips. You can find us on iHeartRadio and also on Podbean. Our next episode will be featuring 2 representatives from the Los Angeles Chargers and how they discuss domestic violence with their teams and their players, and how they support them and their families in those experiences, as that's a trending topic over the past few years. And so we're so excited to get that conversation out there. And I engaged my dad, so that was an awesome connection. I was like, you know, somebody. He's like, I got you. And we also will be featuring another guest. I'm definitely going to take this opportunity, because we just made this decision. We are going to invite Nick on our podcast, if he would please join us to discuss engaging men and PCADV and barriers. We've had Joe, and I'm sure Joe is sick of us. So we're going to now tap to.
I love y'all.
And so we would love to invite Nick to join our podcast at the end of the month to have a conversation more about engaging men.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Hey, we'll send an invitation.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time today to talk with us about this. And I really hope that everybody who joined us today will also follow y'all and keep being a part of these conversations as we're having them. The more people that we can bring into these conversations, the better. So thanks again. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Bye,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Thank you.